I chose, and I emailed Anne at the last minute, so thank you very much for having a last minute change of reading. The passage that I chose, I was asked, what for you defines ministry? Which is one of those horrible open-ended questions. And you looked blank, and then they said, well, which passage of scripture for you defines ministry? And I thought, I don't know. So I thought about the context of my ministry, where I am. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, it's Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. That wrestles with me and where I am at the moment all the time. And for me, it is ministry. So then you start looking around as you do, and you do a little bit of work, about 15 seconds worth. And I discovered that in our common lectionary readings for the major service, which for most of us is, the 11 o'clock Eucharist or 9:30, whatever, it's not used. Throughout the whole 3 years, Mark chapter 9, verses 20 to 27 is never used. And for me, I suddenly thought, hang on, it's such an important piece of scripture for me, but it doesn't seem to be important for those who set up the lectionary. So it got me to thinking. For me, taking this little mustard seed of faith that is within me, and I believe is within you and within us as the people of God, in those like the Father in the reading, he had a mustard seed of faith, and he approached Jesus unsure. And for me, by reading it, it seems he felt outside of the inner circle of the apostles and the disciples, but he was full of desire. And for me, ministry is at the intersection with those whom we meet, like the Father, who in a spirit of mutual vulnerability, we minister and they minister, where belief and unbelief are expressed at one and the same time. Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And ministry, predominantly for me, is the intersections of the occasional offices. If you think about it, the family who bring the baby for baptism, and quite often they're unable to express in religious terminology their reasons why they want their baby done. They just do. And we then begin to minister to the whole family in a very Pauline way. And then, of course, if we get it right, that ministry continues with the family and the child as it goes through school and our holiday clubs. And we get them to the age where they have an intrinsic belief, but they want more. And we should take note of that to regain the innocence of the child. For that child at the age of 8, and these are the questions that I've been asked. How come God didn't have a daughter? I don't know. If Mary and Joseph weren't married, why do we have to get married? I always make a joke to the parents at that point. Maybe I'm not the person to answer that one. Expressions of belief, yet shrouded in unbelief. They want to grow up, and then they grow up, and then they want to be married. And the greatest of marriages, and I'm sure my colleagues will agree with me, all of them, the greatest of marriages are those who come to church because there is something about church, there is something about the faith of the church that for them resonates. And it's those marriages who aren't about the big, fat, gypsy, Greek, Cornish wedding with the meringue and the 50,000 bridesmaids and 10,000 page boys and you don't mind couples ringing you up and constantly if they really are struggling. But when they're ringing you up saying, no, it's very important about how many pew ends we have. There's roughly 15 pews. So, times two sides of the church, 30 will do. Oh no, it has to be precise. Okay, go down to the church and find out. Oh no, we can't. We're on our stag weekend this weekend. Oh right, okay, come down the following weekend. Oh no, it's her hen weekend that weekend. Okay, how about the following weekend come down? Maybe just call me old-fashioned, but maybe come and hear your bands of marriage. Nah, don't worry. How many pew ends did you say it was? Great. Those weddings are the nightmare. And then, as Janet will testify, and Michael, they then turn up 45 minutes late and then wonder why you're kind of going, look, we have to miss a hymn because I've got another wedding in 20 minutes' time. But those couples that come because there is some belief inside them, and maybe that belief is cultic or even superstitious, that if they get married in church, then somehow their marriage will last. And actually, how different is that to many members of our churches now? How much of our faith actually is quite superstitious and cultic? It is a small seed of faith that they have, that they want nurtured, and that we nurture them with, until one day they realise that we're no longer nurturing it, they are nurturing it. And they are crying out, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And then, of course, then there's the funerals. I spend my life doing funerals. Actually, do you know what? I feel more comfortable doing funerals. I feel more comfortable with Good Friday than I do Easter Sunday, which is interesting. I rarely preach. In fact, the only 2 sermons I've ever written on the healing miracles of Jesus, I have preached today. I preached on Bartimaeus, as we all did this morning. And I usually shy away. I normally go for the Old Testament lesson. Because I find the healing miracles very, very difficult. Because I look down at my congregation and I see the woman who lost her 2 18-year-old daughters on Porth Beach in one afternoon. I see the young mum who had 3 miscarriages, all of which were in the late 30-week stages. I see the older man who nursed his wife through years of cancer. And I see them, and I see the pain, and I see the faith, but I also see the struggle. And I find it hard to say, Jesus can make your loved ones better. Because Jesus did it in this reading. I find it hard to say that because I see the hurt and the pain, and I struggle to find another meaning. And while I can't find another meaning, I won't preach on it. And then there are moments when a question isn't answered. It's more, you find a different question to ask. One that sits well with our faith, and one that sits well with the hurting faith of those around us. There is no universal answer to the universal question of God's silence. All of us in our own context must journey in that question of why. And quite often why predominates our funeral ministry. But the fact is that the very question why betrays the belief that is there, as small as a mustard seed, but not finding the answer provokes the unbelief. And this is where ministry steps in. To paraphrase Confucius, we don't know about life, how can we understand death? And Jesus said something very similar. If you don't understand when I tell you about earthly things, how would you understand when I tell you about heavenly things? The intersection at the point of the occasional offices is pertinent to this passage from Mark, in that very often it is to the family we minister. Obviously, when it's baptism with the baby, but the couples and parents and grandparents all come along with marriage as well. And in the case of a funeral, it is always to the other. And in the story, in the reading, it is the Father who intercedes with Jesus. You see, love of someone else provokes a strong faith. And faith is at its strongest and most vulnerable when it's provoked by the love of another. We will put up with a lot of stuff ourselves, but when someone we love is hurting, then we pray. And it is this ministry to the secular, the non-religious, the profane, who reach out and cry, Lord, I believe something. Can't the church help me with the bits I can't believe? It is our ministry through our spirituality that strives to realise and experience the divine presence in all that we do. And so our ministry seeks to break down the barriers between the sacred and the profane, the religious and the non-religious, the holy and the secular. We are asked as ministers to stand with that father of that child and find meaning in the face of meaninglessness, belief in the face of unbelief. So ministry to me, as how I understand it and how I live it, rightly or wrongly, is not to those who want answers, but to those who wrestle with the questions. We are not, to quote a hymn by Michael Forster, a vacuum-packed theology that makes questions disappear. We are a theology of Peniel, where Jacob wrestled with God. Acknowledging our own vulnerability, our own unbelief in ministry is essential for us. We need to be genuine. We need to be real. And it's not just those who wear these funny things, and some of us wear fur things, and others of us wear red things, and someone else over there wears a blue thing. I was told, someone asked the current Bishop of St. Germans, so when are you going to make Chris a canon? And the words hell, freeze and over happened at some point. And I managed to laugh. I did find a funny side. So I will be just plain old me in my plain old peachy scarf. But that's how we need to be. That's how you need to be. Yourselves. You have a faith that God is nurturing yourselves. And you need to be real with that and to be vulnerable with that. They need someone who is also struggling, who has also had moments of confusion, also had moments of hurting and question. Someone who knows something of their struggle. The successful, those people who have faith that can move mountains, they aren't going to touch those on the streets. Those in our communities who are saying, Lord, I believe, but help thou my unbelief. And once they know that there is also some form of unbelief in us, that vulnerability is incarnational yet life-affirming, that just as those for whom they love are not alone because they have that love of the Father, so they also are not alone. Because we all cry, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And with that honesty and that vulnerability, we do indeed grow disciples. Because we grow disciples who live with the questions and occasionally are blessed